We're here today at the Jewish Federation offices, and we are interviewing our scholar in residence for this weekend. We have a new initiative that's based on the Federation's strategic plan to partner with our local congregations in order to better unify the community, and we see the role of the Federation more and more as being a community builder. With that said, I want to ask our scholar in residence to introduce himself and his title and the role that he plays in terms of the unity of the Jewish people.
Thank you. My name is Shoel Silver. I'm from Toronto, Canada, and I'm a volunteer with the Jewish Agency for Israel and have been for several years. As of this week, I became the chair of the Committee for the Unity of the Jewish People, which is a special Jewish Agency committee. Up till now, it's been chaired by Natan Sharansky, who is the chair of the executive of the Jewish Agency. And he is, in my eyes, still at least the co-chair, because it's very important that somebody with the stature of Natan be involved in the leadership, and he will continue to be. So I look at my role as at most co-chair, although officially chair.
Well, let's start out by talking about what is the Jewish Agency for Israel and what is its mission?
Well, the Jewish Agency for Israel is one of those bodies that a lot of people have heard the name of but don't really understand or know exactly what it is. And it really was founded in the late 20s at the time that the British were governing Palestine, and it was intended to be the liaison between the Jewish community of Palestine and the British, and also to get the support of world Jewry to build the Jewish state or the Jewish community of Palestine. Over time, in 1948, it essentially became the government of Israel, and then separately continued as a charitable organization. And what it's been doing over the years, in summary, is trying to deal with the most pressing needs of the Jewish people as they evolved over time, and especially as they related to Israel. So it started with bringing immigrants and growing the country. Later, there was the issue of Jewish identity, and really over the recent time, it's been focused on trying to strengthen the relationship between the diaspora and Israel, and especially with a focus on young people.
Can you give us some examples of the kinds of things that the Jewish Agency does?
Well, the Jewish Agency is still engaged in bringing olim, aliyah, immigrants to Israel, and so some of the programming that's involved there, especially in areas like the former Soviet Union, would involve bringing some understanding of Israel and the role of people from that area, Jews, how Israel fits into their lives. So we run Jewish summer camps in the former Soviet Union, and ultimately we encourage and assist people when they come. We were the primary deliverers of the services to bring the Ethiopian Jews to Israel through Operation Solomon and Operation Moses, working together closely with the government of Israel. In terms of Jewish identity, Jewish education, we're engaged on a number of fronts. One of our programs is called Masa, which is a program that allows young people from the diaspora to spend 5 to 12-month periods in Israel at various programs, volunteer education, internship, etc. And there are a number of other programs that we run that try to inculcate Jewish values in Israelis and inculcate an understanding of Israel and where it fits in the Jewish world. One of the ones in Israel is something called Youth Futures. Youth Futures tries to aim at bringing, elevating the quality of life of youth at risk, but does it in a unique way because it brings Israelis, young Israelis who are university graduates, for instance, to become the mentors and the essentially big brothers on an ongoing basis, so that what we're doing is not only improving the lives of the youth at risk, but we're also giving the people who assist them an understanding of what it means to be part of a civil society and obviously part of a Jewish community.
So as the new chair then of the Committee on Unity, would you help us understand specifically why this committee was created and what the goals are of this particular committee?
Well, the committee has been around at least 15 years, perhaps more, but it was founded in the wake of the periodic crises of who is a Jew and similar issues where the diaspora felt that there was a lack of sensitivity on the part of the Israeli system, the government, the Knesset, to the expectations of the diaspora as far as, you know, if it's a Jewish state and if people in Israel expect us as diaspora Jews to care about it, then they should be more responsive to how we look at Israel, and especially as it relates to religion. So what was founded was this unique body in the Jewish world that I know of, where we have conservative, Reform, Orthodox members, both lay and rabbinic, both diaspora and Israel, all sitting at the table and discussing issues that are of direct import on their religious views. In other words, it's not a committee where people of different streams are coming and talking about social services. They're talking about the very issues on which they are apart for reasons of principle, which, and its goal is really to find areas where we can bridge gaps, where we can have an impact on Israeli society in those issues of conflict, and where with the moral suasion that comes from an or a committee that has that body, and from a larger Jewish organization of the scope of the Jewish Agency, which essentially represents the entire Jewish world, to have influence beyond the, you know, taking account of the fact that, you know, we aren't voters in Israel, but we still want to weigh in on issues that are of significant impact to how we look at our relationship with Israel.
So then, with that said, what kind of influence and power do you have with the government?
Well, I mentioned Natan Sharansky, and in fact, Natan is only the most recent chair of the executive of the Jewish Agency to sit as chair of this committee. In fact, the chair of the executive of the agency has always been the chairman of this committee or the co-chair. And that's a unique thing in the Jewish Agency because generally he has enough to do. But this is so important and so central to the Jewish Agency and what it believes that this has always been the case, that Natan and his predecessors have sat in that chair. And that is a reflection in part not only of the importance of the Jewish Agency, but also the importance of the relationship with the government and how important this is to the relationship between the Jewish Agency and the government. And this, as I say, we have to recognize that we're representing an organization of people, most of whom are not citizens of Israel, and therefore can't have a limited impact on the democratic system of Israel. But what we have found time and time again is that when the government does recognize the need to be sensitive, we are the address that they turn to. And so that we've had several times influence on policies that could be argued or were argued by some people should be seen as domestic Israeli issues. And from the point of view of the Jewish world, we said no, these are not domestic. They have a major impact on how we as Jews abroad look at our relationship with Israel, and we have found that we have been listened to, and in many cases have changed policies.
What would be an example of one of those policies?
Well, one policy that I happened to be directly involved with a few years ago was that the office that dealt with conversions, which is not the rabbinical court, but the office that processes, was actually under the auspices of the rabbinical court at a time that the court and the office were seen more as obstructionists rather than facilitators of conversion. And so that people would go through the process and then they would find some official there who would say, well, you didn't do this right or you didn't do that right, back of the line, we don't accept your conversion, you don't even get to the court. This was not a tolerable situation, especially, and you have to recognize that the Jewish Agency, as the primary mover of Aliyah to Israel, really felt a moral obligation on behalf of the Jewish people, but certainly as an organization, felt an obligation to all of the millions of Olim that we have brought to Israel over the years. And many of them, because they're entitled to come under the law of return, even if they're not halachically Jewish, were now wanting to be halakhically Jewish or recognized as Jews, and were facing these impediments. And at the time, Prime Minister Sharon was the prime minister, and we approached him with a request that he take the conversion authority out of the rabbinical court and move it to his own office. And Prime Minister Sharon, in particular, had a great sensitivity towards these issues. And I happened to be involved in the meeting with the cabinet that lobbied for that, and we ultimately did succeed. And so the office was moved to the Prime Minister's office, where it still is.
Well, we understand that the Jewish Agency has changed its focus in the past several years, putting more emphasis on pluralism and inclusivity. First, could you describe pluralism for us?
Well, pluralism, I would define it. I don't think there's an official definition, but when we look at the Jewish world, or the religious division of the Jewish world, we know that we have multiple what we call streams: conservative or Reform, conservative, Orthodox, Orthodox, conservative, Reform, whatever order you want. The structure of Israeli religion is formally Orthodox, in the sense that all of the bodies that have religious content within the government or the quasi-government system are all in the Orthodox. However, there are conservative and Reform Jews who want to make Aliyah. There are Israelis who want to be Reform and conservative Jews. And so pluralism is really trying to create a system in Israel that accommodates the religious needs and desires of Israelis, whether they want to be Orthodox or one of the other streams.
Is pluralism the same thing, relatively speaking, as inclusivity?
Well, I guess inclusivity is a broader issue, because pluralism is certainly part of it. What we want in pluralism is that whether you are conservative, Orthodox, Reform, you feel a place within Israeli society and comfort there. What's different about inclusivity is that it's not divided only on the religious elements. Whether it's race, we call it race, the issue of Ethiopians and making Ethiopians feel welcome in society, whether it's rich versus poor, whether it's language. I know that when Russians came for many years, they felt excluded because of their accent, and Americans the same. So inclusivity is a much broader thing that says that this is a country built on immigration. And you can't have a country built on immigration if you're not also welcoming to immigrants, and you're not welcoming to all classes of Israeli society.
So what does Jaffe, or the Jewish Agency for Israel specifically, do in Israel to then improve interdenominational relations and promote harmony as such?
Well, I mentioned that the committee itself is a committee, as I said, that includes Israeli Reform, conservative, or as they say in Israel, Masorti, and Orthodox members. It's probably thought, and I think most Israelis probably think, that there would never be a table where all of those people would be at the same table. But in fact, there is such a table, and it's our table. And I think what's not appreciated is that it's much more common to see that kind of interdenominational discussion, dialogue, trialogue, whatever you want to call it, in the diaspora than it is in Israel. And one of the things that we, I think, impart by the way we do things is we are teaching Israel that you don't have to be divided up with walls, that there can be mutual respect, even though there are real denominational, theological differences. I mean, we have streams for a reason. It's because people believe different things. So the very existence of the committee is one element that we try. But in other respects, also, our program, one of the things that the Jewish Agency does with Federation funds is we fund programs of the streams themselves. And so the Masorti, or conservative movement, is given money. It allows it to raise its profile in Israel. The Reform, the same. And so some of the programs give, for the first time, Orthodox people an exposure to the values, the practices of conservative and Reform Judaism. And it's not just something they've read about, it's something they see. I saw a letter a few weeks ago from actually a Haredi person who's...
What is Haredi?
Haredi is ultra-Orthodox. It's a word, people didn't use that word, and over the last couple of months with everything going on, it's become more common. But an ultra-Orthodox person who wrote a letter to the Masorti synagogue or rabbi, probably he wouldn't call the person rabbi, but his relative of some kind, who was a special needs child, had a bar mitzvah at a Masorti synagogue. And the Masorti have a program of bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs for special needs children, and was so moved that he essentially broke through that wall and attended it, and B, sent a letter saying how moved he was. That's the sort of thing that you wouldn't ordinarily have had if it weren't for the resources being available. The other thing that's going on, and we may talk about what's going on specifically in some of the more recent events, is we have a program called Partnership Together, where we have twinning between diaspora communities and regions of Israel. And and quite often you have Orthodox people who may be involved in those communities meeting with people who are from the more liberal streams, because obviously the twin from the diaspora is used to dealing with conservative and reform, and those people tend to get involved, but the Orthodox also have an interest. In the case of what's happening recently, the partnership that involves the city of Beit Shemesh, where a lot of the things have been going on, has actually commissioned or has put out a competition for programs that will bring dialogue together, so that there will be, thanks to the partnership, which means thanks to the Jewish Agency's funds, which means thanks to Federation funds, there will be programs where the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, sit down with the more liberal members, the non-ultra-Orthodox members of their communities, and actually talk about what's been going on and how to get things back on the track of what's been a normal life.
Well, you mentioned Beit Shemesh, and we have had news reports even in the general media about some of the tensions between the ultra-Orthodox Jews and other Jews. And I wanted to ask you, how we as Americans, how should we be viewing these events, and what can we do?
I think you have to view them, I think there are a couple of perspectives you have to have. First of all, Canadians feel the same way.
I meant North America.
I know you do. Obviously, when you see some of the terrible things that have happened, you should be angry about it. And I want to start by saying that we at the Jewish Agency want you to care enough to be angry about it. Because the worst thing would be for you to say, I don't care, that's them, this is us, it's not our business. If we had a similar thing happen in Canada, to pick a country, I wouldn't think it would bother you all that much. And the difference between those is a good thing. So we want you to care, and I certainly, and the people that I know care, and I say that across the spectrum. And when I say across the spectrum, I include ultra-Orthodox, because I hate to say some of my best friends are, that's a cliche. But in fact, I've had discussions with ultra-Orthodox people over the last few weeks, both in Israel and abroad. And these are things of concern. And that's why I think what's important to understand is, and without defending, let alone the event, but also the communities out of which it comes, you have to understand, one, that it is isolated, that these are isolated incidents, and two, that they don't represent the mainstream of the ultra-Orthodox. At the same time, I mean, I think part of what has to happen from within the ultra-Orthodox is more public recognition or more public statements of offense. But you're asking about Americans, and that's what they need to hear. But what you should know is that there have been quite a few statements by leading rabbis within the Haredi ultra-Orthodox community condemning what's been going on, both public and private. And the problem that one has, and it really is the bigger problem of Israeli society, how one deals with the ultra-Orthodox, is that they see themselves under siege themselves. So if a rabbi or a group of rabbis is concerned that by saying something about another part of their group, that will be used against the entire Haredi sector, they hold back. And one of the other things you have to recognize is that a lot of the people who are committing these things are themselves not only on the fringe, but they're on the fringe even vis-a-vis the state of Israel as a state. I mean, there is an accommodation of the ultra-Orthodox to the existence of a state. Some people were against it. The people that are involved in these things are disproportionately among those people. When you see, and there have been these scenes of ultra-Orthodox rabbis visiting Iran and speaking with President Ahmadinejad, that's who we're talking about for the most part. So it's far from the mainstream. And in fact, within the mainstream, over the last few years, there's been a growing integration in many respects of the mainstream Haredi community into Israel. The number of Haredim, ultra-Orthodox, who are now part of the army has grown. The number of programs where they are getting into the workforce, both women, first it was women and men, has grown. I mentioned our Youth Futures program, where we have the mentoring. For the early years, the Haredi communities resisted. They wanted no part of it. We had, but ultimately, and more recently, both in Bnei Brak and elsewhere, we're starting to get Haredi mayors who come to us and say, can you bring that program? So I think we should be alarmed. I think we should be concerned, but we shouldn't panic, and we shouldn't think that this is an irreparable rift and that all of the Haredim are here and all of the non-Haredim are here.
Well, you mentioned Youth Focus, and you mentioned the program for children with special needs that is sponsored by Mazorti, and we, as a federation, and the federations throughout the country, are allocating funds specifically for the Jewish agencies programs such as this that focus on inclusivity and pluralism. Are there other programs that we should know about?
Well, wearing my former hat of budget and finance chair, I can say that more generally we have been over the last few years trying to do as much as we can with declining budgets. And federations, I don't speak of individual federations, but the collective of American federations, the money that we've received for programs has been declining, and we've tried to make do with more than less. In terms of inclusivity, as I've talked about some of the programs for Ethiopians, and more generally trying to deal with bringing the level of populations, especially immigrants, recent immigrants, into a more integrated level so that they feel comfortable and the rest of the country feels comfortable. There have been some very disturbing incidents that have nothing to do with religious secular in the last few weeks, and relating to the Ethiopian community and whether they're being welcomed in some parts of Israel. These are things that we try to deal with through our twinning relationships. A lot of the regions have programs like that, and
that's the Partnership Together
Partnership Together program, yeah. And that is what's unique about that program, as it was with Project Renewal before it, which I believe Tidewater is involved in, is that it really is a case where the diaspora community does not send money. It brings itself with the money, so that the decision making is not imposed from abroad. It's not imposed from Israel, but it's thrashed out, it's discussed together so that the interests of all can be met. There are a number of programs of trying to enhance the Jewish understanding of Israelis. There are programs, obviously, where we're trying to enhance the Israel orientation of non-Israelis. And I think over time, as we do that, and as the Israelis have a greater understanding of their role within a Jewish world, I think that will solve some of these problems.
Great. Well, I wanted to just conclude with a question. What else would you like the Tidewater Jewish community to know about the work that the Jewish Agency is doing?
Well, I think let me put it this way. I think our main mission, I have a lot of respect for a lot of the programs that federations carry out and that other organizations carry out. The concern, I think, that the Jewish Agency is trying to meet is if we like those programs, we want them to continue for multiple generations. And whether it's feeding the hungry or dealing with the elderly, Jewish values that have developed over thousands of years have something to say about those issues. And it's the Jewish Agency's mission to bring those values, to push them along to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation, because otherwise we will be happy with what we've done as a Jewish people in the early 21st century, but then the next generation, fewer people will say, Jewish values are relevant to me. There won't be that many, and then the next and the next. And we are trying through our programs, both in Israel, which is a Jewish state, but we want it to be a state where Jewish values matter, and in the diaspora, where the connection with Israel, we believe, will strengthen the Jewish feeling of diaspora Jews. We want both of those to feel that Jewish values are important to them and will be important to the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Tidewater, for inviting me.